Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Brian Smith with Auburn Daily. We're going to talk some Auburn football recruiting today. Mr. Green coming on the show. He is an expert in this area, Alabama, Mississippi, etc. He gets around to a lot of different places. So without further ado, Mr. Green is going to join us here. I appreciate you coming on, sir. How you doing today?
Man, thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate you having me. I'm tired. I just got back from Southern Miss. I've been watching tons of spring football. There were 26 teams this past weekend. There are a lot of Alabama teams and Mississippi teams. But, man, I'm excited about looking ahead to the summer and talking some recruiting.
Well, I appreciate it. Insights are great from the spring because, as you know, most spring games are the same day, so you can only pick one or two. Really, it's a pain. It's unfortunate, but I got to a few different practices and whatnot, and I'll share some of my thoughts as well. But you and I are both familiar with Mobile, Birmingham, Auburn, Jackson, Mississippi, all over this area. So I'll let you open it up. Whichever area you want to go, class 25, class 26. All these kids, by the way, again, are going to have Auburn offers or soon will. So whatever player you want to start with, David, fire away, brother.
Man, I think you got to really start looking at the 2025 class. When you think about Auburn's recruiting class, Coach Freeze has to continue to build on his momentum from the 2024 class. They did a great job recruiting in-state, and then I think recruiting out of state as well. But when you look at this in-state class, specifically in the state of Alabama, I think the big target right now for Auburn has to be when you start looking at Anquan Fagans from Thompson, the safety there. You got a lot of those top guys either committed out of state, like Naeem Alford going to Ohio State. You got a lot of guys, a couple of those guys committed to Bama. Jared Smith has a lot of out-of-state interest, doesn't seem to be looking in-state of where he wants to be. And so I think right now, if you're Auburn and you're looking in-state, I like them narrowing down and really pushing hard to get a commitment from Fagans at some point in the future. To me, he has to be a guy that's a heavy target for them.
I agree. And for those you don't know, Fagans is part of a family that just everybody's athletic as all get out.
True.
Older brother was originally Bama, then SC. I forget where he's going now, but this family has so many guys. It's athletic. It's not even funny. And I saw him last year for Thompson. I saw him as a freshman for Thompson, etc. He is just a great football player. And I think if you wanted to put him at running back or receiver or whatever, he'd figure it out. But as a natural ball hawk, free safety is where I think he's best. And he'll probably contribute early. So I've heard Auburn, but I know Georgia and a whole bunch of other schools are after. I don't know his pecking order. I haven't spoken to him recently. I haven't seen him since state championship weekend last year. Have you heard anything on where Fagans might be leaning?
I would assume that right now, and everything I saw is just basically on social media. I haven't really spoken with him or messaged him myself, but there seems to be a lot of momentum on social media that he's very interested in Auburn. I'll just put it that way. I'm not going to say, well, he's for sure going to commit to them or go there. But, a lot of times where there's smoke in social media, there can be fire. I mean, you look back at the 2024 class, they kept talking about, the big five, or what were they calling the wide receivers for Auburn? That, they got 4 out of the 5. I mean, that's a huge haul when you look at that wide receiver room. And there was a lot of smoke with Ryan Williams, whether he was going to go to Auburn, flip and go there or not. And so, but they got 4 of those 5 wide receivers that they were all talking about. There's still a lot of smoke about Fagans potentially going to Auburn. You see that on social media. And so, that to me is where a lot of my information, I just gather it from and seeing what players are doing, what they're interested in, who's talking about them, who the other guys that are in the recruiting classes are talking about. I think that's an important factor and part of it. But, yeah, I think he's got to be a big target for them.
I agree. The one that's kind of interesting to me is Jared. Like, I don't think he's going to go to Bama or Auburn. I don't even really think, from everything I've read, and he's been to both, that either school is like, it's not like they're not pursuing him. It's really random for a Birmingham kid not to want to go to Bama or Auburn. And again, they both put a lot of effort into it. Any insights into that? I've heard Georgia, but it's not exactly a shocker. But I mean, like, have you heard anything on that? Because this state doesn't lose a lot of D linemen.
Yeah, I'm everything I've heard is I think he's a big fan of Carolina. I think Coach Beamer does a great job, winning the offseason. I mean, he's going all the way down there to Jackson, Alabama, and getting Duckworth as their, the kind of the crown of his class right now is their quarterback, and is Landon Duckworth from Jackson. And so I think they're reaching into the state. There's a big talent pool here. I was having a conversation with some coaches in Mississippi this weekend. It was like, they were saying, well, how do guys, how are teams doing well coming into the state of Alabama and getting these players? And I said, well, Alabama and Auburn can't sign everyone. And there's so much talent in this state that guys are looking elsewhere, and there are opportunities available because, I've lived in South Carolina, kind of just looking at that state in particular. It's nowhere close to as deep as the state of Alabama is when it comes to recruiting. So a lot of these schools have to find talent-rich states and go kind of handpick and cherry-pick some guys out of there.
Well, it's interesting. Like Duckworth's class of 26, if I remember right, but he's freakazoid. Mm-hmm. And he's a quarterback that can play wing forward. Like his basketball video is fun too.
Right. Yeah, you need to go watch that, YouTube that one if you're listening to this.
Oh yeah, it's worth it. I met him at an Auburn practice. Nice kid. And he's like this long as I'll get. If you watched him walk up, you say, is that a defensive end, like a weak side end? He's built like that, but he's a quarterback and he can swing it. So that's a kid to remember as well. I'm curious, just in general, I'll let you just kind of go with whatever player or players you want. Tootle, different guys. Anybody in particular catch your eye, Mississippi or Alabama, just kind of going around this spring that Auburn would probably be after?
Man, I think you got to go down to the 2026 class. The most impressive, he's currently still a 10th grader. So I'm saying this correctly. Maybe in, next week he'll be technically a junior. But has to be Marquez Daniel. If you don't know the name in the state of Alabama, you will. He's a 2026 wide receiver. I watched him play his spring game. When he walked out onto the field, I don't think I've ever said this about anyone, specifically a wide receiver this young, but not only does he look P4 ready, he looks NFL ready. I mean, he is.
Oh, wow.
He's 6'6". He's built. He has great hands. I would guess he runs a 4.5. Just watching him, I've got a video on my social media. I've got it pinned because it got over 1 million views, and you can see him. He catches the ball and he just pulls away. Like the corner has no chance of getting him. Safety has no chance of catching him. He's pulling away from the guys. And I mean, it was 2 catches, 2 touchdowns. No contest with him. They took him out at the beginning. They lined him up in the first play of the second half, threw him the ball. He ran it for a touchdown, and they don't play him anymore. He's a freak. He had 16 offers when I posted the video of him. And then that next week, LSU, Texas, and Ole Miss offered him immediately. Southern Miss also offered him last week. And so, I mean, he's going to get every offer in the country from, at least all the Power 4 teams. He's that good. He's right here in the state of Alabama at Booker T. Washington and Tuskegee, Alabama. You guys can go see him. If you're a fan of football, I just encourage you, go watch this kid play, because you're going to watch a guy, unless barring any injury or anything like this happen, it's a guy that's going to play on Sunday. Well,
if you've got 6'3" or better height at wide receiver, you're obviously at a definitive advantage. 6'5", 6'6", that speaks for itself. But usually those guys are possession receivers. If you've got any wiggle and straight line speed to go with it, then the floodgates open. So
yeah,
it's wild. Booker T is not normally a program, but they've had a few kids here lately, and Tuskegee right down the road from Auburn. I'll be interested to go see him this August. I didn't know anything about him, but I live in Auburn. I'll go check it out. That sounds like a guy that's probably going to go up the rankings, but if he plays 7-on-7 or he goes in a combine this next year after the season, and everybody gets to see him. Scouts want to see the kids they rank super high live. It's a problem. There's no way to fix it because some kids aren't in the greatest spots. But I bet you if he goes to any of the combines and this offseason goes like the Atlanta Under Armour or anything, he'll be a national top 30, top 40 kid, maybe even higher. So thank you for that information, because it's ironic. He lives right down the road from me and I don't know about it. Well, that's how Alabama works, though. This state doesn't always have kids at programs that get a lot of promotion. So that's
Well,
great.
well, Brian, you know this too. I mean, a kid from November of this past year to right now, I mean, I don't know how much he grew. I don't know, even his coaches. When I first walked over and asked one of his coaches, how tall is he? He said, well, he used to be 6'3" or 6'4". And I said, well, he's taller than that now. So even some of his coaches didn't even know how much he had grown. I don't know if he's grown a ton in the offseason. That could have totally happened. But I know this, of one of those 4 teams that I just named, one of their coaches texted me and he said to me, he said, that dude looks so freaky on film. It's unbelievable. And I messaged him back. It's not just me saying he looks NFL ready. I said, well, my comp was I thought he looked NFL ready right now as a 10th grader. And the coach said, yeah, none of us in the room are denying that.
Okay, well, then that's a kid that I need to get on the ball with and try to get him on podcasts and everything else. So what about Mississippi? I'm just curious. You went down there. Anybody in particular stand out to you?
Yeah, it was ironic that you had asked me to be on this podcast and about setting this up, and knew that we were going to talk Auburn football. And as soon as I get there, there's Auburn guys that Auburn is in on, and another 2026 wide receiver that you're going to know about and hear about is Xavier McDonald. He's already 6'3". I've got a video of him on my social media. His straight line speed may be better than the Marquez Daniels kid. He may run a legit 4.4.
Wow.
And
How big is he?
He's 6'3". He's thin right now, but he's got a big enough frame that, how college coaches are. As long as you got a good frame and they feel like that they can put muscle on you, they'll definitely recruit you. That's kind of their mindset, is because all of them believe that if they get you in their strength and conditioning program and their eating programs, that they're going to be able to put muscle on you. And Xavier is one of those guys that, man, his hands are outstanding. Watching him, I got there early enough. He's from Morton, Mississippi. Talked to his coach. His coach says he's a great kid, mild-mannered kid, doesn't get in any trouble, does all the things you ask of him. And Morton, Mississippi, if you're not familiar with Mississippi football, they may have the best group of skill positions in the country. They got a kid that's an 8th grader that already runs a 4.4 that's going to be playing quarterback for them. And he's going to probably be one of the top players in the country in 2028. And so, man, they've got skill positions stacked everywhere. But Xavier McDonald's the guy to watch for. I know Auburn offered him 2 weeks ago. He's very interested. I mean, I talked to him personally. He's very interested in Auburn. He's excited to be able to watch. And I think this is going to be key that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. He's excited to watch Auburn's offense this year. I think that's going to be an important thing for Auburn and all of these recruits that we're talking about. And so Xavier McDonald is definitely a guy to watch for.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. Any podcast that I go on, if it's a pod that has a team that struggled throwing the ball at all, they say, well, what can they do to get better receivers? I say, you got to play better on the field. Mm-hmm. Those guys want to see it. They don't want to hear it. I don't care which school it is. They're not going to go somewhere. They're not going to get passes. I don't care what the education is, how close it is, how much they like to cook. Do they or do they not already have it proven that they're going to catch some balls? So I think that it's interesting. Auburn's in this spot now because they get the one really good class, a lot of local kids, which helped. So they were blessed. But if they can get a couple more in this class at 25, then they could bridge it, and then you're off and running. What about the in-state kids in 2026? Anybody in particular, David, that kind of catches your eye? I'm sure you've seen several of them. I mean, Hezekiah, etc. Anybody in particular catch your eye and makes you think, this is a kid, either A, is just a great player, and or B, this is a kid that Auburn's after and has a great shot with?
Of course, I've already talked about Marquez. I think he'll have to be a key target. But I think Hezekiah Harris is a big one for Auburn. I think he likes Auburn. But also, in some ways, I saw Mae Jemison play back in 2023 in the fall. They were playing Fort Payne. And Grayshawn Swain is a 2025 edge guy. He lines up opposite of Hezekiah Harrison, which pretty unfair duo to have to deal with in high school. But they're both there. they feel like they're a package deal. They may come out on social media and say, "Oh, we're not," whatever. But it feels like they have such a good relationship and a good friendship that I think Auburn may have a shot at getting Grayshawn. But I also think that they're big in with Hezekiah Harris. Of any of the edge rushers in this 2026 class that I've seen and watched live, I'm not sure that somebody like a Bryce Perry Wright is a fair comp with Hezekiah Harris. They're a little bit different style players, but Hezekiah Harris is just a physical freak when you kind of see him. And he really is one of those guys that looks like he could easily add 50 or 60 pounds and still just be athletic as all get out. And I think this year is going to be a huge year for Harris because you kind of felt like watching him in this past season. It was just like he had grown a lot. He was trying to figure out how to manage, putting on muscle and putting all the technique together on the field. And once all those things come together, all I can say is quarterbacks need to look out.
Well, that is random that you have 2 Power 4 defensive ends at one high school. Just out, I think it's Huntsville area. Jimson's at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How does that happen? Huntsville's not, for population in the South, is not very good. It's just not. It's a very artsy kind of city. It's not as big on athletic, but you get 2 defensive ends that are good enough to play in the major SEC at a high school. I don't care where it's at. Needs to be noted. So that's
right.
Cool.
Well, and I'll say this: if Hezekiah Harris starts to play with the motor and the aggressiveness that Grayshawn Swain has, it's going to be incredible. Because
he's got
Grayshawn,
I know that.
Yes. And Grayshawn Swain, I mean, he is mean and he wants to hit you. And he's got such an incredibly high motor when he plays. And if you don't know what that means, it just means he never takes a play off. Like when that kid's on the field, he's going hard. He's trying to knock the block off the quarterback, set the edge, whatever it looks like. That's what he's doing. And he does it well. And I think him, Swain mentoring Harris is such a good thing for his game. And when all that kind of clicks, it's going to be look out. And I think that's why Auburn's excited about pushing for him, and because the ceiling for Hezekiah Harris is through the roof.
Well, that's kind of what I think too. And I know Auburn's definitely in the mix with him. I've met him. Great kid. And they've been doing a really good job. Alabama didn't jump on him early. Their staff was kind of weird about how they handled some things. And Zion Grady was the same way. Now they're trying to recoup that. I don't know what happened. So it's a little different. They got more time with the 26 kids. I'm going to try and share my screen here, and we're going to pull up a few things with the list. I'm just going to use for this is, you can do whatever you want with these kids. If you look at the top, have you seen Anthony Jones yet? The kid at St. Paul's in Mobile? I've met him, but I haven't seen him play.
I've just seen some of his video and some of his stuff. I mean, but you look at those 3 guys at the top. I mean, those guys are
yeah, those are dudes.
Yeah, I mean, and when I say this, like people sometimes get offended when you talk recruiting, but really, like the NFL and P4 football, it's a genetic league. And so, when you walk, I was at Alabama spring game, talking to some of the recruits that are there. Shadarius Tootle was, him and his family walked by me, was talking with them for a second. I caught them. I mean, these guys don't look like 10th graders when you see them. And so
they're bigger and bulkier, but not fat. They're all lean too.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of them bring just such a presence to their game. I mean, you kind of, when you get to this point, you're splitting hairs with them. I think Anthony Jones, just from what I've seen on tape, just has some of the things that I was talking about already put together, that once Hezekiah Harris has those, and he may show that this fall, once he gets those, he'll be right up there with him. Shadarius Tootle's the same thing. I mean, he is right there. And really, they have it. They're gifted that way. It's just when you get that mental side of the game and you start to put all that together and technique together, that's when it really starts to take off for these guys.
Yeah, I think that Tootle, Harris, and Jones are all, from a physical standpoint, are what you think of what over the last 15 years, any of the following teams, when you think about their dominant runs, they had a defensive end or edge guy like this: Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, LSU. Those
Mm-hmm.
5 programs have been built a little differently up front.
Mm-hmm.
These are the guys that they had.
Exactly.
It's just the way it is. Another guy, and like he's massive, up in the greater Birmingham, Prattville, Vodney Cleveland, a pure interior defensive line guy. Love his upside. He's the traditional big-bodied deep south defensive tackle, but he can move pretty good. Have you seen Vodney yet?
Saw him on film as well. You know, when he comes out, I mean, he's a guy that I want to get down and see Prattville this year. I mean, but he's a 2-gap eater, man. That's the biggest thing is when you look at
Yep.
these guys, can they eat 2 gaps? I mean, when you watch an interior lineman play, I mean, I watched a kid from Pearl, Mississippi yesterday. Looked similar to Vodney Cleveland. Probably, you know, Vodney's a better player than him. So I don't like to comp players and say who's better or whatever. So I won't say his name. But Vodney is, you know, a better player. But both guys just eat up 2 gaps. Like you can't run up the middle on them. I mean, so when they clog that up, you got to go to another side. And that's why in college football, that's what they want these guys to do. The stats, they may not have huge numbers in stats, but when you can't run there,
Well,
that's a
yeah, they
big
run away from them, and it sets your teammates up. So
exactly. That's what those big guys are doing is clearing that space and are eating up that space and sending the guys elsewhere.
the Wilkes kid is interesting. I'm sure you've seen his film and/or have seen him.
Hmm.
Uh, Man, he's athletic. He's the
Yeah.
kind of guy on a basketball court that gets the backdoor alley oop. He's the kid that can play middle linebacker, defensive end, flex tight end. I don't know where people want him. If I had my druthers and I brought him, first thing I always look for is pass rushers if he's interested in it. But I'd be open in it as a coach to play him pretty much where, I mean, he can play running back. He's humongous, but he's just so fluid. He could probably do it.
Yeah. Florida State offered him today. And I think, you know, when you look at what Florida State's doing is they're being pretty selective about when they come up into the state, who they recruit. And so
That's true.
I think he's going to be a big target. I think, you know, if you look at that, I mean, he's close to Auburn. Auburn's obviously should have a great opportunity to land him. But if you don't, you know, push hard, Florida State's going to do a good job. I had one coach tell me, this weekend, he said, of all the coaching staffs that have come through, I'm not discrediting anybody else, but Florida State is the most impressive when they come in to meet a coaching staff. They do a great job of building relationships. They do a great job interacting with the kids. And, you know, this is a coach who has had probably, you know, 30 or 40 coaches come by in the last 2 weeks. And so it's
Right.
not like they're the only team. I mean, he has a good group of people to compare it to. And so, you know, I know this from hearing it from the, you know, the horse's mouth, so to speak, is at Florida State, when they want to go after a guy, they do a really good job of recruiting someone hard. And so, you know, if Alabama or Auburn want to keep this guy in state, they're going to have to do a good job of pushing for him now, especially with a team like that in on him.
The kid, Zion Gibson, I don't know yet, but he's
Mm-hmm.
another long corner. This state always has at least one of those in every class.
Mm-hmm.
J. Michael Garrett's going to announce his decision next month. I think it's going to be Auburn. He's from
Mm-hmm.
Gulf Shores. He was part of their state title team. Really athletic kid that's been to Auburn multiple times. Really good player. The kid that's interesting to me, this is another kid that's somewhat close to Auburn, is Sedarian Morgan, another big receiver. Have
Mm-hmm.
you seen this kid or know anything about it? He's listed at 6'5", 210 pounds. I mean, and he's only going to be a junior next fall, so I wonder if he's going to grow into a flex, for
Right.
one, or maybe play another position altogether. Have you heard anything on this young man?
Well, I think from what I've heard, everything like with the Simmons kid, I think they played for the same team, I believe, Malcolm
Right.
Simmons. Yeah. And so, you know, I think there's obviously a heavy Auburn presence. And that's one of the things with recruiting is that, you know, it helps with these guys, like when they bring people with them, like when a kid goes on a visit, they obviously bring their friends with them too. And so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
easy for Auburn to get in on a guy like that early. But yeah, I've seen some good things about him. I've got a lot of kids I've got to get down and see this year because, like you said, you know, we were talking about before the show, the 2026 class is just absolutely loaded with talent. And these guys are, you know, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is who we know about now. so to speak.
Absolutely. There's always one more. You know what I mean? I like to, you think you've seen everybody that you need to see, and then that doesn't necessarily translate to being the case. Just kind of looking at the list, like Jonah Winston, that's obviously Jameis's brother or
Mm-hmm.
a nephew. I'm not sure, brother or nephew, whatever. He's from Hoover.
Mm-hmm.
Marquez Daniels, a kid I've heard about. He's a receiver. Another big kid, Booker T out of Tuskegee. You know,
Yeah.
we talked about him earlier. Like all these bigger receivers now are kind of a thing in the area. He's ranked 14th on this list. From what you said, that'll be top 3 or 4 pretty quick.
Yep.
And the state, and then there's a quarterback at Hoover. There's another shocker.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
there's a big shock. So overall, like the thing that is most important, this state per capita is elite.
Mm-hmm.
The NFL announced that the state of Georgia was number 1 this past year for NFL talent. Not a shocker there either. Alabama was like number 6. So Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, like these schools, there's a reason they're so good consistently. The players are already here.
Mm-hmm.
If we're doing this, can you imagine how many people in the back office at Alabama are doing, like, there's no excuse to be quote unquote behind. And,
Right.
you know, heading towards wrapping this up, like, I just want your opinion. Do you think we're to a point where if you don't offer like an elite, like Tootle or somebody like that, if you don't offer as a sophomore before he goes into his junior year, do you think schools like Bama or Georgia, like they're, you know, those are big, broad box. It's kind of hard to not pay attention to them. But do you think some kids would kind of pass? Or do you think it's to that point where like the me and the selfishness and recruiting with all the people around kind of impacts kids probably more than it should?
That's a really good question. I've not really thought through that. I think there's so many, guys that you kind of feel like you have to offer some of the ones that you talk about early. But I'm just thinking about the 2026 class in general. They're the Bradley kid from Spain Park, who's a quarterback. Like, his recruiting starting to build, and he plays in a region where. That if he has a great year, then his recruitment is going to take off because of who he plays against, and if he
Yeah,
does
proving it.
some
Yeah,
big things, and so I think that group of feeling like they have to be offered as 10th graders is a pretty small group of kids, and so I think it's easy for teams to kind of just offer them, get in on them, just say we've offered them, and then really start to see who develops. Once this new film comes out from the fall of 2024, do we want to continue to pursue this kid? Is he developing in the right way? Is his character good? All of those kind of things. And then you get a kid like, watching this weekend. I mean, standing there next to an SEC coach, they were there to watch an offensive lineman, and this wide receiver from Laurel, Mississippi, Zachariah Jenkins, has 3 insane touchdown catches. And, that coach, I didn't even know who he was either. We look him up and he's got 1 offer from Arkansas, and
no more.
probably this week, he's going to have, 5, 6, 7, 8 offers come in because of him putting on a show in one game in front of the right people. And so I think that's kind of where you are when you are a 10th grader, is that there's some obvious guys. And then now we're at a point with specifically the 2026 class. There's some spring film coming out, 7-on-7 stuff that's about to take place. These guys can start to make a name for themselves.
Well, that's kind of the way it is. You got to get in on them early. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
David and I have been talking about this today. David, thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to have you back on real soon. Tell the people where they can find all your work.
Yeah, I'm at AL_recruiting. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all those things. You can find out about players. I'm constantly posting, and I don't just post about big name players, anybody within our state or surrounding areas. I like to help any of those kids get more and more exposure. So
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You can find me at FBScout_Florida, working for AuburnDaily.com. So thank you very much, everyone. Everybody have a great day. Take care.